you can actually invite God into your mothering. You can invite him into when you're breastfeeding. You can invite him into when you're walking your child or talking and playing with your child. Just like we invite him into our workplace every day.
Hello, I wanted to take a special moment to welcome you to Season 2 of the Generous Girl podcast. We're so thrilled that you're here. This is a podcast all about generosity and how it is interwoven into 5 areas: faith, family, fitness, finance, and friendships. On every episode, we will spotlight 1 or 2 of those 5 pillars, and you'll hear a story of a woman who has an incredible journey that she's been on, where she was possibly just surviving at one point and now has learned to thrive and walk the path that God has for her. Her path is unique, just like each of our paths are unique, but I guarantee you when you hear the story, you will be encouraged and inspired to want to take the next step in your own life, whatever that step may be. I am with the National Christian Foundation of California here in San Diego. It's such a privilege to get to gather with women all around the world who want to live a more generous life. As we know, everything has been given to us from our God, who is so generous. So our time, our talents, and our treasures are all his anyways, and it's up to us to get to give those back to him so he can use them and multiply them and touch many people's lives. So thanks so much for taking time and putting in your AirPods and whatever you're doing in your incredibly busy life to listen to these women's stories. We're so glad you're here as a part of this community. Welcome, welcome. Welcome back to the Generous Girl podcast. This is season 2, and we are so excited to kick off the new year of 2024 with a very special guest named Nadya Dickson, who I know you're going to love hearing her story. As a communicator and professional leadership coach, Nadya helps high-impact Christian women discover their kingdom assignment while coaching them toward a life of increased margin, balance, and focus in order to exponentially change their world and to extend God's kingdom. She currently serves as the national and international director of the Master's Program for Women, and her happy place is at home in Charlotte, North Carolina, where she gets to cherish time with her husband and her best friend, Damien, and their 2 grown sons, Alex and Andrew. So welcome, Nadya.
Thank you, Kim. What a pleasure to be with you today.
I feel like you're the perfect guest to kick off this new year, and I'm just really looking forward to this conversation. So for the listener who might be out on a walk, might be out on a run, might be watching this on YouTube, but I think the components that you have to share about your own story, as well as what you currently do in your career and your calling, I think there are going to be a lot of takeaways for women, like as they go into this new year and want to be more purposeful, intentional, leave a legacy, like all the things that we want to do. And then in the crazy busyness of life, sometimes we go, wait, what did I even get done last year or last week or yesterday? And I know like all the listeners are coming out of the holidays and hopefully we recovered from our sleep and, you know, it's post-Christmas, post-New Year's, but I'm just excited. So why don't we start by, why don't you tell everyone, what is your current role? I alluded to it, but go ahead and explain a little more about what is the Master's Program and what you do with them.
Yes, thank you, Kim. So the Master's Program for Women is not a degree program. A lot of people ask, do I have to have my bachelor's degree completed before I go to the Master's Program? The answer is no. Jesus is the master in the Master's Program. And Bob Shank started this program, you know, before 2000, in the late 90s, for very successful men, executive men or men in leadership or business ownership, nonprofit leaders who were very successful in their career, but lacked maybe a sense of balance or wise stewardship when it comes to all the other areas of their lives, their wives, their children, and kingdom engagement. So a couple years after he started that program, Sandy Olson, who was my coach in the Master's Program, said, you know, Bob, there are a lot of women that God is raising up who are leaders in their own right, who really need balance, margin, and focus, and to understand their kingdom calling, can I teach this program to women? And he said, absolutely, yes. So she began facilitating the same content contextualized for women in 2000. And I was a part of that. It was life-changing for me, but it's really a holistic program. And if I summed it up, I would say it's understanding and walking in life mastery as you're preparing for your life mission.
That's a really good way to sum that up. And I also want to remind people, if they haven't listened to episode 4, Sherry Shank, who is married to Bob, she was a guest on the podcast. And like you, a number of years ago, I went through the master's program and I went to Sherry's house, and she led the group that I was in. And it is a 3-year program. And I had little kids at that time. So even going through the material and reviewing it for our podcast right now, I was like, wow, there's so much in here. And with being sleep deprived at the time with 4 little kids, I probably did not get everything out of that course that I could have. And I'm looking forward to just really, in this new year, honestly, going through the different modules and in this new season of my life as an empty nester, completely different than it was, when I went through the program. Yes. But so many new things that I can apply in a way that I couldn't apply then. So I love the program. I think it's so well thought through. So you said one comment about just how you were just radically changed through the program. So can you unpack that a little bit more?
Sure. Well, I became a Christian when I was in my first year of university, but I don't know, Kim, that I actually went through a discipleship process, or, I wasn't a student of discipleship. I had a lot of zeal, not a lot of knowledge. Mm-hmm. And I ended up going to Bible college, where I learned a lot about scripture and music and evangelism. But still, again, I saw a lot of Christian leaders who were walking in this amazing life mastery, if you will, but I didn't know how to get there. I was just enamored by their marriage, or enamored by the way they were raising their children. And it always felt like there was this chasm. Well, I wasn't raised in a Christian home. I didn't have parents that lived in a Christian marriage, so I wouldn't know how to do that. And I just always aspired to that place, but never was able to get there. So I had been married for 14 years. And I would say both my ex-husband and I were very consumed with our professions, mm-hmm. and said we loved the Lord, but we didn't know how to serve each other. We didn't know stewardship, and we were still taken up with idolatry. It just looked different. Idolatry meant career. Idolatry even meant ministry. And so all of those things choked any real fruitfulness in our lives. And we even played pastoral roles. I know it's hard to imagine, but it's so true. Right. And it wasn't until I was introduced to the master's program, I was a professional woman. I was in a management consulting firm at the time, that I felt oxygenated, and I felt affirmed in my love for God, my proclivity towards business, mm-hmm. and felt like, okay, I'm a kingdom leader in the marketplace. I'm a marketplace minister. It was the first time that I felt affirmed in those things. And at this time that I went through the program, I was newly remarried. Mm. And so as I was going through, the master's program is a personal, professional, and spiritual formation program. Mm-hmm. I was personally being reformed as I was allowing these concepts in scripture to really go to those deep places in my life. I was living out of a false self. Mm-hmm. So all of these places I surrendered and consecrated to God, and He remade me. And I had to own my stuff. I was finger pointing in my first marriage, and realized, no, I had a lot to contribute to that. And also with my own parenting. So I did not feel adequate as a mom. I didn't feel adequate.
Who does?
But I felt like I felt accolade and achievement in the marketplace. And I knew what those metrics were. And I knew if I hit them or if I didn't hit them. If I was at my dinner table, it did not feel like I was at the boardroom. First of all, I didn't know if I had the respect of my children, and if I was hitting any metric at all in parenting. And so I outsourced a lot of that to other people. And it wasn't until my first year in the master's program that God said, Nadya, I'm calling you to your home. And there is a limited amount of time that you have with your sons to impart things to them that are needed for their calling. And you're trying to outsource it, and it's not going to come from those places. And so that was another part that God just had to heal in me, that I was adequate as a mother. I did have what it took for both of these young men and their future.
He chose to be your sons.
Yes, exactly. And so there was a lot of healing through the program, things that that I just kind of stuffed down and didn't deal with. They had to percolate because God wanted to heal those places, reform those places, so that that's part of, when I say life mastery, it's revealing the life of the master in our own lives. And that's where, all of those areas now are getting consecrated and healed and now being spirit informed.
That's beautiful. So beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, because I feel like life is it's like an onion. So we all come into it with these different layers of how we were raised, where we were raised, what was the climate like with the, the emotional temperature of the home, or the spiritual temperature, the financial temperature, all of the things. And then you enter your own relationships and you bring many of those things with you. And then the spouse has different layers that person's bringing. And it is, as people say, like Christianity is challenged because it's so daily, and it's not like any of us just, master it overnight. But God is so patient. He is so loving. He wants us to be like his son, and he so gently teaches us. And whether a person has had just like extreme trauma in their life, or maybe they can't point to any, particular trauma, it's still this, like, we're all in a classroom of how are we going to become our most true selves that we were made to be with those relationships that he's put in our lives. Maybe the person listening has many children. Maybe the person doesn't have children at all. And maybe they're married, maybe they're single, but each of us is put here on this earth for a purpose, for a calling. And especially, I love this podcast, that it's geared toward women, because, and again, I've shared this before many times, that my 2-word purpose statement is encouraging significance. But there's nothing that makes me happier than encouraging the significance of a woman, and how allowing her to see that despite whatever layers are in her life, or like you were saying, like, you were almost like discounting things, like, I can't do that because I didn't have this, or I'm not able to do that because I didn't, and we believe the lies, and we limit ourselves, right? Until we're finally able to see, wait, I'm the only one who is called to be the mom of this child, or I'm the only one that's called with these gifts, with this background. Nobody has the same story as me, just like no one has your story. So I hope, like, the listener, as she goes into this new year, I want to encourage her to, like, embrace her story and embrace it, and know that whatever has happened, good or bad, like, God is just such a God of love and forgiveness and grace, and wants to always bring, beauty from ashes, and just to use each woman in the most powerful way, whether it's, in the corporate boardroom, or it's at the local grocery store, having the one conversation with the person next to them. Like, we just never know. But I love that he's got a plan for each of us. And I think, again, this is the perfect podcast for kicking off the new year, because my next question, I think, would be, how does a woman, like, tap into that for her? Like you do have an online master's program, and then talk about, like, the actual cities where you teach this. But let's talk about that. Like, how could a person join the master's program? And then if they're not able to join at all, how could they benefit from listening to this podcast?
Okay. Well, first I'll talk to the ones that think that they might want to consider a journey with other women into the master's program. And we have classes forming in Orange County, Dallas, Dallas, and Charlotte, which is my hometown where I live.
Yes.
And so those three cities. And then we also have an online opportunity. And so I can always give you those links, Kim, if people want to do it.
Yes. In the show notes, we will for sure include those. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then for women that don't feel like they're able or have the capacity to fly to any of those cities or attend any of those sessions, my encouragement would be, do some journaling and reflecting. Now we have a brand new slate for the year, and think about what worked for you last year, what did not work, what is your vision in 2024 for how you want, what do you want to see in your family? What do you want to see in your marriage? God has given you a dream for your marriage. He's given you a dream for your family. He's given you a dream for your career. He's given you a dream for your ministry. So seek him. He loves to be asked. He loves to be seeked. He says, knock and the door shall be open. He wants us to romance him, really. He wants to be pursued. But the reward of that, because he rewards those who diligently seek him, is that in that secret place, he's going to show you why you're here. And he's going to show you an God-honoring vision of what it looks like for all of these different areas of your life. We're all called to be stewards. And like you said, you were a steward as a young mom when you first went through the master's program, and now you're at this different life stage. And at every life stage, we walk in, I believe, increased levels of stewardship, balance, margin, and focus as the Lord shows us what these things look like. And they look different in every season. So I can almost guarantee, Kim, you're going to have an entirely different experience when you go through it again. But for those who are just looking at the next year and how can they make progress in terms of, living their best life, I would call it their kingdom-authenticated life. I don't believe in self-actualization, but I do believe in kingdom actualization, and it's who we were intended to be. It says in Ephesians 1:4, we were chosen. He knew us before the foundation of the world. He already foreknew who we were going to be and when we were going to be established in the earth. You already talked about that earlier, that we are called to this generation. So God has something for each woman to give to the generation, to give in her marriage, to give in her relationships with her children, her adult children, her grandchildren. So as you're praying, Lord, what does that look like? What does stewardship look like in those areas? Then there's strategic behaviors that follow that. And the activities that we find ourselves saying yes to just flippantly, or because we may be people pleasers, or for whatever reason, women are nurturers and cultivators. We get asked to do a lot of things. See if those activities align with the vision that God gave you. And if they don't, then they don't belong on your plate. Because
someone else is there to be raised up to fill
somebody else can do it. And he's given us 24 hours a day to do exactly what we're called to do. So if we find that we're constantly running in overwhelm or we're over functioning, we've taken on more than is required. Now, for a young mom with young children, it can feel like you're over functioning all the time. And I have a lot of young moms say, how is my spiritual formation going to grow? I don't even have time to do a devotion, right? And I just encourage her to say, look, your spiritual formation is unique right now at this stage of your life. And you can actually invite God into your mothering. You can invite him into when you're breastfeeding. You can invite him into when you're walking your child or talking and playing with your child. Just like we invite him into our workplace every day. We invite him and ask for his strategic counsel in everything that we do. So it really is getting to a place of discerning what the difference is between being fruitful versus being busy. And
Absolutely.
yes.
And, in our culture, "Oh, how are you?" "I'm great. I'm just so busy." It's almost like a badge of honor. And it's sort of like,
Right.
well,
Yeah, and it's sapping us as women. It's sapping our creativity, our adrenals get tapped out, and then
Mhm.
it affects us in so many other ways when we really want to be nurturers and cultivators and, give birth to things, be
Right,
creators, co-creators with God.
right.
We lose that ability and we start to feel hemmed in to things that demand our attention that were never of his planting. And these could
Mhm.
even be Bible studies, by the way. It
Sure.
can, yeah, it can be good things,
Mhm.
but not the
The
thing
best.
that God is
Mhm.
calling us to do.
Mhm. So a woman could, if they lived in Orange County, Dallas, or Charlotte, they could join the master's program, and then you meet periodically in person as a group and throughout the year for the 36 months. And then if they're not in one of those cities, there's an online group.
Right. There's a link to participate, and everyone can come and participate in one day called an audit. And as they sit in the day, they will know if God is calling them into that journey with those women in that room,
Mhm.
because it is something you need to experience.
Right.
And I will say the in person is much,
Sure.
much
Mhm.
more engaging than online. But I have women that just cannot get to one of those cities,
Sure.
and they would rather do it online than not do it at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I love the program, obviously, and my husband went through it as well. And I can't speak highly enough about it. So I definitely want to encourage a listener who's living in one of those cities to, look it up, pray about it, and see if that is something that they're able to join, and certainly attend an audit and get a feel for what it is like. And then as the next, level would be, if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking, I could have more balance, prioritization, focus, then I would highly recommend, you also pray about joining this program online and seeing, it's like a framework or a grid that you can put your next 36 months in, where at the end of it, you're going to be able to look back and see these components that were just strategically focused on, so that it's not just a blur of 36 months and you just go, and 3 years older, but what did I really, how did I grow? What did I learn? Or what did I even achieve in these areas? So I think it's a really lovely roadmap for a person who wants to be more intentional and strategic with their life. So one thing that you brought to mind was, you mentioned the word vision. And I wanted to also just add a practical tip here for someone who, might not be able to do either of those options, attend, a group in person or an online group. One thing my husband and I like to do every January is we like to build a vision board. So if you're watching on YouTube, I brought it right here, and you can just kind of see some of the things on it. And it's basically, we get a big piece of foam core, cut it in half, go to the local, CVS, and get a bunch of magazines. And then we just put pictures on the vision board of things that we might be dreaming of. Maybe it's going to this beautiful place, or it's doing a certain activity, or it's a certain type of food we want to create. And we just have enjoyed doing that. We first did one board together, and then now we like to both do our own. And it's amazing when you look at the end of the year, how many of those things have actually occurred and have happened. And so I want to encourage people to do that. Like, it probably would take you 2 hours out of a weekend in January to sit down. Maybe you're single, go ahead, do this by yourself. You're married, do this with your partner, but just dream. Like, allow the 2 hours in your life to dream of what beauty might you be able to capture, in this year. So, and the other thing I know a lot of people do is choose a word for the year. So last year, my word was abundance. And this year, my word is gratitude. And I think I've landed on that word because obviously I work in the space of generosity, and gratitude is so tied to generosity. And I think I've been so inspired by so many guests on the podcast with the role that gratitude has played in their lives. And, years ago, I led a group with the Ann Voskamp's book, 1,000 Gifts, and how she wrote down, just everything she was grateful for. And that was powerful for each of us in that group. So I want to be more focused on that in this new year. So anyways, in the center of my vision board, it will say gratitude for 2024 when I make it. I haven't made it yet.
That's so fantastic. I did a vision board early this year, early last year, I should say, that came out of a Dream Master weekend.
Oh, talk about a Dream Master weekend, because that is also a neat concept to share with people.
Yeah. So if you are married, right now it's offered to married couples, but we're working right now on one for singles. There's a Dream Master weekend. They usually have them in San Diego, Cambria Pines, up in north of San Luis Obispo. Yeah. And then also in Dallas right now. And that weekend is a weekend for you and your spouse to come together and really dream with God. You're dreaming separately at the beginning, and then you're coming together. There's a template where you're capturing all these things, and the template superimposes, and you see where you're really in alignment with some of these dreams, which you would never think until you've gone through the exercise. Because my husband's an engineer. He talks very differently than I do, uses different language. And what I realized is we really wanted the same things. And so he said, well, let's work on one of your dreams. We made a vision board, and it was for me to go and visit my parents in Canada and take my father on a road trip.
Oh, so special.
And it was, but while you're in the process of creating this vision board, you're spending time in your dream. You're spending time allowing God to fill your belief and your faith. It becomes a tangible thing and not so ethereal. And so as you're putting it down on your corkboard or whatever you're using, you have a visual that it says that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. It's like it's becoming tangible. And once you visualize it, it's easier to get into agreement with God about it, Right. And so anyway, I love the idea of your vision board, Kim.
I think it's similar to, when you go to these different classes or read the different books about writing down your goals and the power that comes from just actually writing it down. So no, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. And that also reminds me, as we're thinking of in this new year of 2024, was something we had talked about prior to starting this recording, was the idea of rest and the concept of Sabbath. And why don't you talk about that a little bit? Because I know that's also incorporated in the master's program.
It is. And it's really funny because when we talk about we do talk about the 80-20 principle, which is the principle that typically 20% of what you do the best yields 80% of your results, right? And we're always going after KROI, kingdom return on investment. And so I had one lady ask me a couple of weeks ago, she said, well, this makes me feel like I have to do more. And I said, actually, no, it means that you're going to do more of the right thing and you're going to actually do less. And one of the things that we have to practice is Sabbath. That's a stewardship of time. And it's not debatable. It's not negotiable. God has commanded that we have a Sabbath, a time of rest, recreating and coming away with him, or we will simply burn out. But it's during that time, when we think about focused time or buffer time, which is just responding to the things that are just part of everyday life, there's a time of Sabbath where we come away and just unplug. And that is the hardest thing to do in this life. And there's a lot of high achieving women that feel very guilty about not doing anything. It seems to go against their grain, but yet it's a commandment.
The Mary and Martha story.
There you go. There you go. There's a sweet sister in the master's program that wrote a book called Mary Morning, Martha Day.
That's good.
If you have a Mary morning, you'll have a Martha Day.
That's good.
Pam Lilly is the writer of that book. She's in Houston. But it's so true. And for us as women, we're so used to responding to everything that we put ourselves last. And Sabbath is so necessary just to unplug. I am a sanguine. I don't like not being active and not being with other people. But God is really convicting me more and more in this year, especially, that I need to come away with him. And Sabbath can look different for different people. Some people run.
Absolutely.
They hear God when they run. You know, they
Right.
feel the pleasure of God when they run, right? Chariots of fire. And some people feel the pleasure of God when they're worshiping or playing the piano or writing. And so we need to discern what that looks like for each one of us. But it really does mean that you're shutting off the world
Mm-hmm.
and getting into, you know, in the Old Testament, it was getting behind the veil. It was a secret chamber. It was private and it was intimate and it was with God. And it's when we come back out of that place that we can function in our kingdom identity without tapping into reserve, like no reserves,
No
you know?
reserve. Right.
Yeah.
And you might have screaming children, and they're not going to stop screaming necessarily on the Sabbath day you're taking, but to unplug, and however that looks for you. Maybe it's just not looking at your emails. Maybe it's not, spending time driving all over and going crazy places. You'll know what it looks like for you, where your body feels like, yeah, I had some time to rest and now I'm ready to go into the new week. And I think it's also creativity, when we're not just all frenetic, like on the internet and chasing all the rabbit trails and following this and scrolling that, all of a sudden our brain can calm down, and then it does have a chance to a little bit focus more on the blank canvas and being less reactive and more proactive, I think, as we go forward. So that's good. I'm glad, because I think these are all things that, whether a person's a part of the master's program or not, they're really important components to a balanced life. And we talked about balance at the beginning. So our two threads that we are talking about that are woven into this are friendships and faith, because this is a concept, the master's program, of you do have a Christian mindset to be a part of the program. That's kind of assumed. And the friendships, the power of that it's being around like-minded women and rubbing shoulders together and knowing that it takes a village and we can all encourage one another, and that we're not alone, and that everyone, whether a person's a career woman or maybe they're, at home for a season out of the corporate world or the nonprofit world, we're all faced with the challenges of not enough hours in the day and all the people, all the needs. And that's why it's so important that we each look at our own lives and not, they say men compete, women compare. And it's never helpful to be looking at, the person over here and wondering how this person does it, because there's so much that we don't know with that whole story. So, but thank you for sharing your own story. And then, how, maybe touch on, before we kind of finish this section with the master's program, how did you find this job? Like, what led you into the actual role?
Okay. Well, when I was working at the consulting firm, we had a strategic partner who was constantly asking me if I would participate in an audit day for the master's program for women. And I said, Jeff, I just don't have any time. I have no time. I have young kids. I have a demanding career. And he gave me a bit of a descriptor. And I said, well, I know a couple women that really need that. So, I brought them, I invited them, and I came with them because I invited them. And as I sat there, Sandy Olson was our coach. She flew into Charlotte for our cohort. I was just amazed that I was sitting there listening to the very thing I needed.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that not having time is a fallacy.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
It's what we choose to put our time toward.
That's right. And it's not about spending time, it's investing time. And again, you're putting it through that filter of return on investment. But as I sat there, I realized this is exactly what I needed. And I went through a formation process that my husband noted, my children noted. By the time I graduated, Sandy asked if I would be interested in coaching the program in Charlotte.
I love it.
And we were working with underperforming assets at this consulting firm. And I said, wow, I was an underperforming asset in the kingdom of God. And I would love to work with women who are going through this similar formation experience. So I started coaching in Charlotte in 2010, 2011. And then in 2017, Sandy said, I'm getting ready to step away. Would you prayerfully consider being the director? And at that time, just like you and your husband do this vision board in January, my husband and I go away every November or December and we do like a life plan just for the next year. We just compare our calendars and we get real intentional. So she happened to call us while we were away on this trip. And I said, I think that's going to work. We prayed about it, and my son was going to be in high school. I had a lot more autonomy. So I said, yes. Well, little did I know I was going to have to homeschool my son in his high school years. But I would have never been able to do that or even consider it if I hadn't have gone through the master's program. So my husband and I both homeschooled. I stepped into that role and really started raising up other women in these other cities to really be kingdom leaders in their cities. And that's the part that I love, is just staying in touch with the women, finding out how their lives are unfolding and their leadership is just elevating. And then also, just like you, Kim, I have such a heart for connecting. And when you start meeting all of these different women in these different cities, we have those session days, but we also have coaching calls in between where you get to meet other women in all the cohorts, so even some of our women in India or South America can be part of those calls, and you start to see how God is just raising up these other sisters. And then we start cross-pollinating, and then we get invited into each other's boards, and you just see this amazing stuff take place. So that's my favorite part about, being in the directorship role, is getting to see what God is doing in all these different places and all of these different women.
Exciting. Well, even before we got started, you and I were talking about this. We know this person, and then person's connected to this person. We had no idea. Right. And that's even in the Middle East. So I love that. Okay. One last component, because I want to make sure, because this podcast is titled The Generous Girl, that we do touch upon generosity. Yeah. So I love what has changed in the master's program since I joined, is how you've incorporated the journey of generosity. So can you speak to that?
Oh my goodness. Well, I've been in so many of those now, because that is part of our middle session where you cross over from life mastery to life mission. Okay. That ends up being such a profound session and a pivotal session for these women. And I know for men too, but my own experience, I've seen women. Now, that some of them might seem extreme, but just, I had one that just wept and said, Lord, I'll give you my mountain home. I'll give it to you, Lord. I'll sow it, And the Lord said, no, I want you to dedicate it. And so instead of selling it and giving the proceeds, she now uses it for ministry in such a profound way. That's one example. But and then just seeing other women realize what they have to give. Not even thinking that they had anything to offer or give. It's God calls us to be generous in creative ways, and we all have something to give.
Yes,
we can
maybe
all
it's time.
walk, yes,
treasure, right?
We can all walk in that kind of, it's kingdom generosity. It's the abundance mindset, not the scarcity mindset, right? And you cannot outgive God. Exactly. So that's been a pivotal session for a lot of women. And we give, just like you talk about in the Women Doing Well, tracks, that we give according to our purpose. And so when women are more aligned with their purpose, their giving becomes so creative and impactful now, because it's coming out of a passion and it's coming out of who they are. And so just even that discovery process, walking through that. So it's just been a beautiful thing. There's nothing more beautiful than a woman who's just surrendered to God. And we are nurturers anyway. I mean, we're wired and designed to be nurturers, but then just having this outpouring of, the things that God has given us, not just for us to enjoy, but things to offer that evoke praise. That's what Paul talks about. Out of your giving, you're actually bringing praise to the Lord, because the recipients of your giving are now worshiping him as a result of what you've done. So it's just so glorifying and beautiful.
And so how it's meant to be. So I definitely want to encourage the listener, like, work this year, 2024, to make it your best year ever. And whatever your role is with your marriage, single, kids, no kids, career, no career right now, look at this year as, what does God want to do in my life? And then when 2024 finishes, be able to look back and look how you grew, look how you took that next step, how you met a new person that totally influenced your journey, that was just not a mistake that that person was put in your life. So I want to just kind of conclude this whole conversation with encouraging each listener, like, how valuable your life is. You really, really matter, and nobody can fill your shoes. Your path, and wherever you're placed, is where God has placed you. And he has known your boundaries since the beginning of time, where he has put you, the lands in which you live and dwell, have your being. And I want to just kind of encourage every listener to believe the best and not limit yourself with the scarcity mindset and the negative talk that so easily can fill our minds, but to really believe in 2024 that it's going to be an amazing year, because we serve an amazing God. So I love talking with you, Nadya. It's so great. And so I want to make sure that we have time here to conclude, though, with the 3 questions. Like, what is your favorite Bible verse, and a book that you're reading? Let's start with those 2.
Okay. My favorite Bible verse is 2 Corinthians. No, sorry. That's one of the verses I was going to bring up about my experiences. It's, oh my gosh, it's in Luke.
It's okay.
Luke 12:32, where Jesus is saying, "Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." And that really speaks to me. I feel like we've experienced a lot of turbulence in 23, and to think it's not going to continue in 24 would be really narrow-minded and narrow-sighted, because we know that this shaking that's happening is shaking off the things that don't belong to the kingdom, because the kingdom is unshakable. Mm-hmm. So anything that's supposed to be solid and remain, only those things that remain are are things that are grounded and founded in God. And so it's his good pleasure to give us the kingdom. Fear not. So when you see all of these things, just know that you're an unshakable citizen. You're an unshakable kingdom.
That's powerful. I love that. Okay, book that you're reading.
Okay, this book that I'm reading, it's taking me a while because it's deep, but it's The Gift of Being Yourself by David G. Benner. The Gift of Being Yourself, the sacred call to self-discovery. And some people might think, well, that sounds like a little self-absorbed. Actually, it's that you can't know who you are if you're not spending time with the Father and asking the Father, who do you say that I am? Because he made us all unique. And we all have a unique expression of his passion for the world. And so it's talking about how your calling is that intersection. And we talk about this in the master's program, where your deep gladness intersects with the world's greatest needs and what the world is hungering for. Right. So this is a beautiful book.
That's great. I am going to read that this month of January in 2024. I love it.
It's a fantastic book. Yes. Thank you.
And your bargain.
Okay. Well, I was looking for cute little gifts to give to lots of friends and people, because I love giving gifts. And there's a website called Fields of Hope. And they have the most beautiful soaps, jewelry, lotions, things that are just pampering. And there's even things for men. But all of the proceeds go back to the Fields of Hope ministry and On Eagle's Wings, which is to help trafficked women and girls. And a lot of these women and girls that are rescued are creating these items. Wow. And so they're learning skills and they're learning entrepreneurship. And also we can buy these items. And so, we're giving to the ministry, but we're also, valuing their work and their creativity. And they're nice. They're really nice. So
that's great. That's a great tip. Well, thank you. Well, thank you so much for being here, Nadia. It's just been a beautiful time, and I know every listener will be blessed from your story, your experience, your current calling and role that you're serving in with the master's program. So thank you for just your own steps of, I guess, obedience and listening to how God was speaking to you to take the next step, and how new things unfolded in your relationship with your kids and your spouse and your vision and the intentionality of, taking that time before every year and dreaming. So hopefully the listeners encouraged to do the same. And I just can't thank you enough for your time, and God bless you.
Thank you, Kim. And I want to make sure that your listeners will have a reflective journaling exercise to do for the new year. So I'm going to include that so that they can go through some of the very things that we talked about today.
That is wonderful. Yes, that will also be in the show notes. And that's a perfect practical way that someone can listen to the podcast and then download that and have an actual worksheet to work through. So perfect. Well, thanks again, and God bless.
God bless.
Bye.
Thanks so much for joining us today on the Generous Girl podcast. We're so glad that you're here. And if you know of someone that you think needs to be a guest on this podcast, please reach out to us. New episodes are released every other week, and you can follow us on YouTube and on all platforms. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.